Hello and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. This is the third in a set of three podcasts that we did involving the state of education in America. And we had multiple guests on in the previous two episodes. And I have back tonight Mr. J. McCarthy to help me wrap up the issues we were discussing. And I'm very happy to have you back, Mr. McCarthy.
Mr. McGeady, it is always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you very much for having me back 3 times. You're incredibly brave.
Yeah, that's quite all right. It's always a pleasure.
Someone might even say reckless.
So as I mentioned before we started recording, this is the 2nd of February as we're recording, and today is Groundhog Day. So you were going to explain to me if the groundhog saw its shadow or Bill de Blasio dropped the thing or what happened.
I don't know. I didn't even know that Bill de Blasio was involved. But if Bill de Blasio was involved, all bets are off.
Well, no, he dropped the groundhog a few years ago when he was mayor, I believe.
Oh, okay.
That's what happens when you try and take it out of Pennsylvania.
Good to know. Good to know. It's James Joyce's birthday, too.
Yes.
And James Joyce did not see his shadow. So we're really in for it.
Well, I'm actually glad that he didn't see his shadow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Mr. Pucci, Professor Pucci has joined us.
Well, I should have precluded this introduction by saying we may have Professor Pucci joining us. So anyway, we had several teachers and professors on in the previous, and let me just introduce Professor Bob Pucci, who's now joined us. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing well, thank you.
We're here with Mr. McCarthy, and we were just going to wrap up that 3-part series we were doing regarding the state of education, which you were gracious enough to join us on one of the previous ones.
Well, I popped in. I thought we were rescheduling it, so I had.
That's quite all right. Yeah, that's okay. So yeah, we were just going to tie a few loose ends up regarding this issue. And Mr. McCarthy was just saying that today is James Joyce's birthday, and he didn't see his shadow, so we're okay.
Well, that sounds good. Well, I was thinking about something I saw yesterday, which said something that you can't confuse education and intelligence, that someone can have a degree and still be a complete idiot. And
yes, that might be the backbone of all the things we're trying to tie together here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I would say about that is my response to that was that I think to an extent getting a degree is like filling out forms. You fill out application forms, you fill out your homework, you fill out the test, you fill out a report, a paper. And assuming it's not even generated by AI, but you did it, you did the assignment, but were you educated? Did you get anything out of it? See, I always called all of my assignments exercises. And the idea was that people were supposed to get something out of the process of doing it. And the product was, well, whatever it was, but the thing was the process was the important thing. And I think now there's too much emphasis on the product, and the product is easy to fake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you feel about that, Mr. McCarthy?
Aldous Huxley was very fond of quoting Mohammed, that a scholar who is not in touch with his metaphysic is like an ass cart full of books. And too many times in my checkered career, I have been, for all intents and purposes, an ass cart full of books. If you're not connected to the underpinnings of the facts and information, if you think for a moment that it comes from you as opposed to through you, you're in a lot of trouble. I couldn't agree more with what Professor Pucci said. And I would say the last thing he said was the most poignant, which the product is easy to fake, but the process is everything. And it goes back to the paradigm of giving somebody a fish as opposed to teaching somebody to fish. If the essence of education is not autonomy, and self-reliance, if that's not the ultimate goal of, especially on my side of the street with secondary education, what is? And definitely a good jumping off point that if it stops being uh, a process, not only in the sense of being an activity, but a process that has built on previous processes and is based on a level of some mastery and expertise that is gained over time, then, what is it except grades? And you were saying the last time we had this conversation, Professor, that your students don't understand why you can't just change the grading system to accommodate their desire for a higher grade.
Right.
Why, because it would be much easier for you to do that than for them to do what you want them to do.
Well, I fear that at my previous college, at my college, that they're moving in that direction. There was a very disturbing sentence in the newsletter of the president of the college, where she laid out her priorities, and they were all about getting people in the seats and keeping them there. And she had a line about removing internal obstacles to their success. And I was thinking, what could that be? Could it be professors teaching college courses and expecting college work and grading accordingly? And I was really shocked. And one of my colleagues who's still there sort of echoed my concern. Is it now just expected so that we have retention and that they can move on? You give them A's and let the 4-year school sort them out or something.
Is she trying? Is she trying to allude to the fact that you have to go easy on the grading? Because if you give them a grade that they deserve, they'll leave.
Well, yeah, the thing is, if they're failing, and there was more than one time I was told, the college does not have an official attendance policy, and I said, yeah, but I do. And I say, if somebody misses that much class time, how are they possibly going to do a good job on the assignments? And the idea that, well, you can excuse that. Now, I remember when I went to college, a lot of times the professor would say, you don't have to come. I'm not taking attendance. And I'm like, yeah, all right. But then how do you pass the class? If it is a question of just sort of filling out forms, if you will, well, then I can fill out the forms, I can get a C, and I can move on. But did I learn anything?
Yeah.
Did I get an advantage of the experience, or did I just get 3 credits?
Well, one question I wanted to ask both you gentlemen in the previous podcast that we discussed this issue. Do you feel like you are teaching as well as you were taught, or is there an obstacle in the way? It's not a trick question. I just want to know. Well, let me put it this way: do you think the level of education now, from your end of the game, is equal to the level of education when you were both in college?
You want to go first?
Well, I guess I would say that I'm thinking about the intellectual maturity of a college student today, and I think that they're kind of like almost like a 9th grader when I went to school. I mean, they're very they're not very curious. They just want to know what they have to do. And sometimes they don't even understand that. And I remember when I went to college, I had professors who were quoting in Latin, and they were making all these sort of cultural references that if you didn't know them, you were supposed to know them. And I think the bar was a lot higher. I think over time, the bar for the quality of what you can do has been lowered. And I found myself towards the end sort of trying to just teach to the 4 or 5 people who should be in the room as opposed to the entire class, because I felt like I was cheating the people who were there to actually learn as opposed to get 3 college credits.
Mm.
I would say that my experience is precisely the same, and you just dial it back because I actually teach ninth graders. And right now I'm teaching right across the 4 years, and I have at least one class in each year. And there is no question that standards have tumbled, and that they were already tumbling when I was a student, and that there was already a crisis in the quality of education that manifested itself in a number of different ways. Tom, I understood your question to be, and it was a very, challenging question for any teacher to answer. Am I teaching as well as I was taught? And I would have to say, in the aggregate, no. And I'm not comfortable with saying that, but I can't honestly say that on a regular basis, I am. It would be easy enough for me to cop to the idea that they weren't as prepared for what I have to give them as I was prepared for what my teachers had to give me. But more to the point, it's the dilemma of, you're ready to go with what the curriculum says is the appropriate class material for the group that you have in front of you. And you realize right away, to no surprise whatsoever, that regardless of what the curriculum says, the group is not remotely ready for what you have to offer them. So what do? It's, I unfortunately overuse this this paradigm, but it's like you now have to fix the car while it's still on the road. There's no pulling over. There's no stopping and going back to whatever it was that they were missing in their previous formation that would make it at least possible for you to move on with them, because it's never one thing, and it's always a fundamental thing. So there are days when I say, everything else be damned, I am going to find a way to do what I set out to do today. Forgive me for talking so much, but it's really a very provocative question.
Well, I didn't mean to. It wasn't meant to be an insulting question. I wanted to get to.
I didn't find it the least bit insulting.
No, I wanted to get to what the obstacles are in your way, and I think you expounded on a few of them that prevent you from teaching as well as you were taught.
If you don't mind, I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. You and I were talking before, and I mentioned James Joyce. Now, I not only love James Joyce, I love teaching James Joyce. I love teaching the short stories from Dubliners that are the most accessible to the kids. And the fact of the matter is that when the Common Core Regents was revamped 6 years ago, one of the first pieces of literature that they used as a reading comprehension exercise was the short story Araby by James Joyce, which in a nutshell is about a very young man's first experience with unrequited love. So, over the course of many, many years, it's a story that if you get the right group of kids and you teach it well, it hits them at the level that it's supposed to hit them. James Joyce is one of the biggest names in literary realism. He is, to me, he is the master of the epiphany, finding the deep truth about all of life in the seemingly ordinary experiences. And, today I was going to get it done. And I had a class that was reasonably capable of following along. And I maybe spoon-fed them a little more than I should have. I maybe leaned on them to see the things in the story that I wanted them to see. But I would have to say that the lesson was successful because I achieved my goal, which was making them understand that he was talking about a universal experience by reflecting on one little tiny experience in the life of one person. But the one thing that was missing from my lesson was discovery. Instead of leading them to find these things for themselves, I showed them where these things were. And, on the one hand, that's not really the way it's supposed to go at this level of the game. But
What
on
grade
the
are
other
they? What
hand,
grade were they in? Excuse me. What grade were they in?
they were an 11th grade class,
Okay.
and they would be precisely the kids who would be taking the Regents exam and would get as part of their reading comprehension on the Regents exam a short story by Joyce or by Fitzgerald or by Hemingway or someone like that in the reading comprehension passage. So I was dead to rights with what I was doing, and I think they understood why I was doing it, and I would say I had qualified success. But it ain't like the old days.
But there's nothing administratively that's blocking you from.
I personally would be lying if I said that on a day-to-day basis, anybody is stopping me from doing what I'm supposed to be doing. As a matter of fact, on some days, I think it might even be a little bit of the reverse, which is that maybe they should be peeking in on me more often and seeing what I'm up to. But I don't hold that against them, and I have to qualify that my experience is not mainstream experience. I teach special needs kids. I teach kids on the spectrum. I teach kids with trauma and emotional and psychological disturbance. So there's a lot of factors to weigh, and there's a lot of reasons why their educational formation is not what it ought to be, that are not reflective of society's problem. But no, I would not blame the administration at all for my particular dilemmas in the classroom.
How about from the college side, Professor Pucci?
Well, that one line, in that newsletter, I thought was potentially significant. I know that, one of the places where I guess teachers have the greatest academic freedom is at the college level. And the concept of academic freedom is extremely important, letting people, sort of teach the way they want to teach, and teaching, kind of like at a very high level. But I think that there is some pressure if, for example, they did a survey and they found that the grade most issued at the college was an A. And and I was like, really? And actually, there was somebody who had calculated all of this for every class or for every instructor. What percentage of A's did they give? What percentage of B's, C's, D's, F's, whatever. And I found out that a colleague of mine who was teaching this online class, basically gave 95% of the students who took the class got an A. And I was like, well, that doesn't seem to jibe with the overall average, never mind my experience. So, so I wonder if, I know that at college we have a lot of adjuncts. And of course, the easiest way for an adjunct to get by is to be really nice and give the highest grade possible, because you're not going to get a complaint. The person was maybe unprepared, they didn't do a good job, but everybody got an A, so who cares? And I think that is part of the problem. I was, I retired in August, and one of the classes that I taught is media and society. And I found out that it was going to be offered, and it was going to be taught by this assistant dean who had a degree in communication on the production side. never taught the course before, and was basically given the assignment 2 weeks before. And I emailed and I said, don't let her use my Blackboard shell, because during the pandemic, I basically had to put my course online. And oh, they said, oh, no, no, I'm sure she's going to come up with her own thing. And I'm like, oh boy, sort of like, hey, I can imagine how good it's going to be. But of course, she'll just give everybody an A and everybody will be happy. Now, this semester, I thought they might ask me back to teach my film class. But, generally in my film class, I have one or two people who wind up getting A's, and then a few B's, and then a lot of people wind up failing simply because they don't turn in the work.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering, on some level, they say like, well, good, we got rid of Pucci. God, he's got standards. We don't want that.
He's killing our
You know,
income. Yeah.
it's sort of like, so the last thing we want is a college professor. Uh, you know,
Well, I have my notion from a pedestrian point of view. I'm not a teacher. When someone is, or when an organization is taking the stats of what percentage of grades a specific teacher gives out, that the motive behind that can only be financial, in my view.
Yeah, well, I think that everything they do is driven by that financial necessity of getting people in the seats and keeping them in the seats. Yeah, and quite frankly, there are people who wind up pretty much expending all of their financial aid at the 2 year school, and they've got like maybe 1 year left at the 4 year school, and then they've got to pay for that last semester or last year. And I'm like, as long as we get their money, we don't really care what happens to them. That's
Uh,
my unfortunate perception.
Well, somebody once told me, a teacher, may or may not be in this podcast right now, that he felt that 80% of the students that attend college shouldn't be in college. And it brought me the question when I was thinking about this podcast. Do you think the sense of urgency, like Mr. McCarthy is preparing kids for college, essentially, am I right? And maybe back in the day, or maybe back when we were in high school, let's say, or even before our time, the teachers may have been preparing kids for life, because what percentage of those kids that graduated high school, say back in the 60s, went to college, you know?
Mm.
So maybe there's a lack of urgency on that, and that might have a fact that might be a factor in the decline of the quality of education.
Where I work, right? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that registrations are down across the board, and they're finding that particularly among male students, there's a kind of a growing disinterest in going to college, and trying to figure out what that is about. I think that they are kind of understanding that there are people realizing that. I went and I got a 4 year degree, and I'm working at a job which doesn't pay very well, and this other guy apprenticed in the electricians union, and he's making a lot more. And I like that. I think that there was a feeling somewhere. I think it had a lot to do with the GI Bill after World War II. That's when a lot of state colleges were actually created, or when they grew, because of the GI Bill and the returning soldiers going to college. And then college became a kind of a must, if you will. And before that, it really didn't have that same necessity. That you could finish high school, get a job as a machinist or something, and have a perfectly wonderful life, and not worry about not being able to buy a house. I remember the obituary of this man who died in Poughkeepsie. He was in his 80s. He was a machinist. He had 3 or 4 children. He owned his own house. When he retired, he and his wife took an RV and traveled across the country. And so obviously, financially, maybe because he was in a union and because his employer paid well, but he had health insurance and he had all these things, and he didn't need a college degree. Now, they're always talking about the necessity of having a college degree. You need that degree just to be able to apply. And of course, because that becomes then kind of like, well, the entry form, the application. Do you have this degree? But it doesn't suppose that the person is necessarily qualified, but
Right.
they have a degree.
Well, I remember distinctly, and this is, I'm going to say a fact, when I was in high school, um, any municipal job, sanitation, police, fire, you didn't, all you needed was a high school diploma to qualify for those positions, which is not the case today. And
Right now,
I always, my assumption always was because they're adapting to the fact that the quality of education with a high school degree is not the same as it once was. So you had to have at least an associate's degree to be a police officer or a fireman.
well, I
I could,
think it has that, and also to do with trying to narrow the field. How many people can apply, and if you didn't have the discipline or the wherewithal to complete a 2-year college degree, then we don't want to see you. I mean, I don't think it has to do necessarily with critical thinking or a body of knowledge or being able to write or to express yourself orally in a eloquent manner. I think it's really just a question of well, you need this to. If I said high school diploma is enough, I'll have 1,000 applicants. If I say you need a 2-year degree, I'll only have 300 applicants or 200 applicants.
well, that makes sense. Yeah.
I see that. I remember one time, because in the academic world, the credential is everything. A former student of mine who graduated with a bachelor's degree from Tulane in film wanted to know if I would write a recommendation for him to teach my class art of the film this semester. And I said, sure, I'll do it. I wasn't aware that he only had a bachelor's, and I said, the college is going to want a master's degree. I said, but you may be very qualified, but you don't have the credential. But they'll take somebody with the credential who's not at all qualified.
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point.
And
Yep.
that's really what the degree has become about. It's a way of limiting people to apply. But I would say that any degree, whatever it is kind of suspect, because you can fill out the forms and get one.
Absolutely good point. Do you agree with that, Mr. McCarthy?
Here's the thing, and I, as usual, I agree with everything that Professor Pucci said, but I'll take it in another direction. Where I am right now, the pendulum is swinging back in the other direction. Very recently, and I think commendably, they're starting to acknowledge the fact that not only is college not a realistic prospect for kids in my line of work, but it's just not for them. And the vocational training is very much back in vogue. And I think, among many other things, that one of the things that we're seeing right now, and we've been seeing in the last couple of years, is there's a critical shortage of plumbers and electricians and artisans who can make things and fix things. And every one of us can tell the story about the guy with the PhD in Renaissance literature who's scraping by, and the
Right.
plumber's apprentice who is flipping houses. And that's on an existential level. That obviously makes vocational training not only more attractive to kids, but more attractive to institutions that want to prove to parents, and in my case, districts, that they are preparing their students for life. Okay. When we started this section of the conversation, you were talking about how 80% of the people in college, how did you put it? We're not prepared for college?
Shouldn't be in college.
Right. Now, shouldn't be in college has two different interpretations.
Right.
On the one hand, you are not qualified to be here, regardless of what it is that you want to be. You know me our whole lives, Tom, and you know that there was no question that I was not going to go to college.
Right.
I couldn't do with my life what I wanted to do with my life if I didn't go to college. But, I was not only belonged in college in the sense that college was the only way for me to become what I wanted to be. I belonged in college because my teachers prepared me for college. When you say that 80% of the people don't belong in college, you're also taking into consideration there's no need for them to be in college.
Well, I think that was the implied
because they don't want to be scholars and they don't want to be scientists.
Right.
They want to be, they want to make a decent living doing good work.
Right.
And we have hopefully now as a society stopped collectively turning our noses up at people who work with their hands and starting to acknowledge that this is Howard Gardner, that there's all manner of intelligence and that education has traditionally slighted most of the manners of intelligence, and there's a lot of guys and women who are not what we used to call book smart, but are genius plumbers and genius masons and genius electricians, and not only make an invaluable contribution to society, but make a wonderful living doing it.
Oh yeah.
And now the pendulum is starting to swing back. And you know what else? They're not $75,000, $100,000 in debt at the age of 25 as they start off on their careers.
Right.
They're good to go.
Yeah.
Well,
you're getting paid while they're being apprenticed.
Yeah.
I look at it and I say that maybe that's why a lot of males are deciding not to go, because they see that after the degree they're not really suddenly making $100,000, and they have this debt, and the debt is a very sort of real thing. I think it kind of forces you into that kind of like cycle of the 9-to-5 job, and don't think about it because you can't lose it because you got to pay off this debt, and you're not necessarily doing even what you might do if you were doing the best thing that you could do. And I remember I had a student in my speech class who was a Native American. His name was Mayachi Two Dogs, and he took my speech class and he did okay. He got a B or something. And the next semester I see him in the hallway and he's like really depressed looking. And I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And he goes, "Well, I'm having a real tough time with these classes." And I said, "Well, what do you like to do?" And he says, "Well, I work as a carpenter." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "What do you do?" And he says, "Well, I'm doing framing." And I said, "Well, that's great. I mean, you should, work at being a carpenter and become a finish carpenter. You'll make a lot more money than you will with your 2-year degree or even your 4-year degree. And you can't outsource a carpenter. You can't outsource IT. You can outsource customer service. You can outsource a lot of things, but you can't outsource plumbers and electricians and carpenters because they have to physically be there."
Yeah, you can't fix a pipe over the Zoom.
I'll tell you something. I'm sorry. I just very quickly. 2 days ago, one of my former students came back to visit, and he's apprenticing as a carpenter. And he came into my classroom and he said to me, I'm working on becoming a carpenter. I said, there is no more noble profession in all of the world than carpenter, because after all, who's the most famous carpenter who ever lived?
Nice.
And his face lit up. He said, "Yeah, And I said, and let's not forget, Jesus wasn't just a carpenter; he was a teacher. So you and me, we're pretty much it.
Yeah, well, obviously there's trades that you're going to need college for. You know, if
Yeah.
you're an eighth grader and your dream is to become a neurosurgeon,
Right.
and
Right.
you know, but as somebody who may or may not be on this podcast said, probably 80% of them don't want to have a trade like that, or even like you taught Professor Pucci, media for people that potentially want to be journalists or TV newscasters or whatever,
Well,
right?
in my last journalism class, I had one high school student taking the class who wanted to be a journalist, and the rest of them were taking the class because they had to take it.
They wanted the credits.
And a couple of them had some potential talent, but they were extraordinarily resistant to instruction. Even when we were talking about how to take photographs, and it was like pulling teeth to get them to do assignments. At the beginning, when I first started teaching journalism, I had a portfolio that had to have 10 articles, and the longest one had to be at least 1,500 words long. And I was lucky to get like 5 or 6 out of this crowd. And and a couple of them, because journalism has become basically a multimedia endeavor, I have them now. I didn't at the beginning; it was mostly print journalism, but I had them do something like a podcast episode where they had to do an audio only package of information, tell a story, and I had them do a video one. And I said, if you can shoot it, you should shoot it. Now they've all taken a video class, so theoretically this could have been the case. But it was just like one person tried to recycle it, do the same story. And I said, no, you can't do that. I said, that's not the point of the exercise. It was very frustrating, my last journalism class.
Well, I think Professor Pucci, you alluded to what you ended up doing each semester was focusing on the 5 or 6 students that actually wanted to be there and wanted to learn what you were teaching. What was the average size of your class?
Well, that journalism class was extremely small because they were sort of ending the program, and they were just sort of we had so few students that they decided to suspend the program. I think I had 6 or 7 students in that class. So having the one student who wanted to be a journalist and having 2 people who were at least willing to try was a good thing. It was a fairly high percentage. My other classes, if it's a public speaking class, I'd have like 20 people. And out of that 20 in any given semester, 7 will fail simply because they never turn in their assignments. Never did the speeches. They didn't show up to class. And a couple of them are, kind of like, well, why did I have to do that? And you're just like, well, because that's what the class is about.
Do they all work for CNN now, or?
No.
Sorry, I
don't
couldn't
know.
help myself.
I guess they will all, potentially graduate at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But
and they're plumbers with degrees now, right?
no, I don't think they could be plumbers.
No. So, JR, Mr. McCarthy, do you think your challenge in preparing? I don't know if you agreed with me that you no longer prepare them for life, but you prepare them for college. That may or may not be the case, given what we just discussed. Do you feel pressure of the quality of what the kid knows when it gets to your stage of their academic career? In other words, Do they have a good basis by the time they get to you?
Oh no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with unnecessary and even pernicious conversation at the level before my level about whether or not it is necessary or wholesome to teach the basics. This is a problem that I have encountered. I love little kids. I never had any desire whatsoever to be a teacher of little kids, because that's real hard labor, doing the grunt work of teaching the kids the fundamentals of language arts and the fundamentals of math. But the thing is, and I don't want to disparage anybody, because there's plenty of heroic elementary and middle school teachers out there, but we don't really teach grammar anymore. We don't really teach numeracy as it was taught when we were kids. Rote memorization, which was regarded as a necessary evil when I was a student, is now regarded as torture and pointless, as well as painful. And the kids who pay for it, the kids are obviously the ones who pay for it, but they also know they're paying for it. And I've said this in this forum before. My students have a very palpable sense that they were cheated, that somebody was supposed to give them something and they didn't give it to them, whether it was, cursive or, the fundamentals of grammar, the fundamentals of spelling. And, God knows, in the English language, the rules are all over the place, and it's a unruly business to teach the basics. But, I have kids who come to me, and this is over almost 40 years now, who come to me at the high school level, and it's time for us to read Othello, or it's time for us to read Macbeth. And they say to me, I read Macbeth in the 7th grade. The teacher gave them, the classic comic version of Macbeth, or they showed them a movie, or they gave them, some, breakdown of the story. They didn't give them Shakespeare. And the kid will say to me, you know what? Not only did I read Macbeth, but Macbeth stinks. and I'll write on the board, okay, Macbeth stinks. Which one of these words is the noun and which one of these words is the verb? And that they cannot tell me. And that's kind of a trite observation. And I'm in danger of trivializing a bigger problem. And I don't want to be one of these guys who points to the guy behind me and says, this is the guy that made the mistake. I was just, I was helpless because I had to deal with his. For whatever reason, if a kid does not come to secondary education with the prerequisite skills for mastering the curriculum, then the snowball gets bigger and bigger. And by the time they get to Professor Pucci, not only is the problem virtually beyond remedy, but the attitude of the kid is, everybody else has passed me along. Everybody else has capitulated to my need for affirmation, or the school's need for good statistics. Why won't you do it too?
You think they're self-aware of that, though? Do you think they're aware of what they didn't learn?
I am absolutely convinced that not only are many, if not most of my students painfully aware, they're pretty ticked off about it too.
Do they verbalize that to you?
They have on many occasions.
Really?
And they have asked me to fill in the gaps that, now, Tom, you may remember that my handwriting left a great deal to be desired back in the day.
Yeah, that's why I thought you were going to be a doctor, but go ahead.
But, cursive is one of those things that, right now, on the one hand, they don't teach cursive anymore. Well, maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. Is cursive even necessary anymore? But kids don't get cursive anymore. They don't learn how to write in script.
Right.
And since most of the writing they have to do on state exams is in cursive, You have to have a special, for want of a better word, dispensation to use a computer during a regent's examination. The essays that you're writing in longhand. The whole purpose of cursive was to make it easier to write both more fluidly and more legibly when you had to write.
And more
And
expressively,
right.
right?
Well, no, I wouldn't even go as far as saying more expressively. Just say neatly, and without the drudgery. It's less exhausting to write with cursive than to print in block letters. It's just a simple thing. Now, it could be that the last bastion of that kind of writing is going to be regents exams and other like state required exams from other states, and there's a lot of talk about getting rid of them, and there's a lot of good reasons why they should get rid of them, but they still have to cross that hurdle as well.
Get rid of the cursive requirement in the taking of the exam. Is that
Well,
what you're
no,
saying?
I'm to get rid of the exams. The regents exams are certainly on their way out. Across the board, and this is unfortunately a conversation for another time. But
just quickly, what would be the reasoning behind them eradicating it?
I think it's a combination of a rather ethical acknowledgement that it's not fair to assume that they will be ready to take these exams with any proficiency when the time comes, given the, to put it mildly, sporadic nature of education prior to that. But the other reason is that the very foundation and the very meaning of literacy has been so changed by computers and by multimedia that it's no longer a relevant referendum on their ability, just the fact that it's really damned embarrassing year after year to have these abysmal grades. It's a combination of a lot of things, but the talk on my side of the street is 5 years from now, it's going to be gone. I don't know what's going to take its place.
Well, that's
I'm going to be gone 5 years from now too.
That's what I was just going to ask you. What they're going to replace it with would be interesting.
Well, I'll let you know as soon as I know.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's not going to be. It's just not going to be as. The standards won't be as high as they probably are even today, which I still think are lower than they were 40 years ago.
There can be no question.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, there were certain things that you had to know. You had to do them correctly, and now I was thinking of the tremendous difficulty that students have at the college in mathematics, and this is something that is actually proves kind of like the failure of the system, because mathematics requires this continuation of information, of knowledge. I was telling my student, when I tell my students about listening, I tell them that if you have difficulty listening, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you do, but one of them is you don't like what you're listening to. And for example, in math, I said, now let's say that the instructor is talking about A and has an equation for A, and then has an equation for B and an equation for C. If you zone out and don't get B, there's no way you're going to get C. And because it's sequential, it's not like, and I would tell them, it's not like your Western Civ class, where after you take the test on the Greeks and the Egyptians, you can just drop that right out of your head and never have to worry about it ever again. And no, math, you've got to keep that knowledge that you gained to apply to the next level of math. And that continuity is something that they're not really prepared to do, and so they're not very good at math, and they're not very good at writing because they don't read.
Well, there's something. Mr. McCarthy said he didn't want to get into the expressive part of cursive, but There's something about your own hand drawing, if you will, the words that you have in your head that is lost when you're typing it out on a phone or a text message or an email.
Well, they have done studies that say that students who take notes in longhand have a much better retention of the information than those who type into their computers.
Oh,
And so
that's definitely true when it comes to note taking. When it comes to obviously, writing the information down, you're processing the information. What I meant by by expressive, Tom, was that I'm not 100% sure, and I got some skin in the game with this. That you need to be writing. You need handwriting to write beautiful poetry.
It propels your brain
right.
forward when you're trying to formulate an idea.
It certainly doesn't hurt. It
Yeah.
certainly doesn't hurt. There is nothing bad about teaching cursive, except that perhaps there is some relevance to the idea that it's on the way out, because it's just we just don't write we just don't physically write anymore. But there's everything that you're saying is true. I didn't mean to disparage that. I'm just saying that from the practical point of view of the kind of writing that you have to do in high school traditionally, cursive makes it easier to do it. That's what cursive is for.
Yeah. Well, as among the many things that have fallen by the wayside, I think that's one thing that needs to be retained. There's an argument to be made for, there's a lot of younger people, even younger adults, that couldn't look at the hands on a clock and tell you what time it is. And you can kind of sort of say, okay, I guess you don't need that anymore. But cursive, it's a mechanism to develop the idea in your head and bring it onto a piece of paper. And as Professor Pucci said, it's different. It's different than writing an email or an essay on a typewriter. Even it's just different. Your brain approaches it differently, and I just hope we don't lose cursive. I think it would be a serious mistake.
right. Well, my handwriting is so bad, I always block print it.
But you can read it, though, right? At least you can read it.
No, all the writing that I do, all the physical writing I do is block print, because no one would. I think Professor Pucci might agree with me with this. It's not only a matter of they can't write in cursive; they have trouble reading cursive.
Oh yeah.
And they'll never be able to read my cursive. So I write in block. And now I don't even do that anymore, because the blackboard was replaced by the whiteboard, was replaced by the smartboard.
Yeah.
And I don't do nearly as much writing as I used to do. But
Yeah.
the kids and certain members of the support staff, they used to watch me when I came in the morning and I was writing notes on the board. And they would say to me, "How do you do that?" And it was not like because of my writing. It was like, how do you write all that stuff on the board? You don't have any notes in front of you.
Right.
And I say, like, because I've been doing it for 25 years, for 30 years, nothing has changed. Romeo and Juliet still ends the same way. It's like, and they were dumbfounded that you could retain that much information.
Yeah.
But,
Right. Well, I think that's when you talked about. I remember when I was in college. I took a lot of French, and they told me that in France you could find kind of like a cleaning woman, and she would be able to recite passages from Moliere and Corneille and Racine, and that this was part of their education. And of course, a lot of people say, "Oh, well, who needs that?" And what good did it do the cleaning woman? But I bet it helps her remember every single sequence of what she has to do in a given day. I mean that it's a memory exercise. And if you don't think you need memory, because I have no idea, let me check my phone.
Yeah.
You get dependent on the phone, just as I don't know how you are, but I have very few phone numbers that I've memorized because they're all right here in my phone, and all I have to do is press the person's name, and it'll dial their number.
I don't even remember. I don't even know what my own number is.
I don't know what your number is either.
All
But
right.
I'll tell you what your number was at Parkchester Road in 1975, if you like.
I know. Um, I'm glad both of you brought up the point earlier in the podcast. Since this is the third of three podcasts that we're doing about the state of education, I was hoping to end it with a positive, and I'm glad you guys brought up about hopefully starting a trend of going back to the craftsmanships, apprenticeships, and maybe moving away from nonsensical college degrees that aren't going to serve your purpose when you become an adult, unless you want to be a neurosurgeon.
Well,
But
or
huh?
I think the important thing is, whatever the subject is that in the curriculum there's built in this idea of critical thinking, because you need critical thinking even if you're a plumber.
Right.
Because you're looking at, I love that part of Murphy's Law that says no one has ever seen one quite like your model.
You
You know,
definitely
and
need you definitely need
so
a foundation in mathematics too if you want to be a
right,
plumber.
right.
Yeah.
But you also, need the ability to look at a situation and say, gee, I've never done one like this. I guess I can't do it. Or no, what has to be done? Let me figure it out.
Yeah.
And so I always said that that was true. If someone took the film class, they're learning how to critically analyze a film, and that process of analysis could be applied to anything.
Right.
Your budget,
Right.
and that I think is the only really good thing that college can do for you
Yeah.
is that skill of critical thinking about being able to look at a set of circumstances and figure out what to do,
Yeah.
and not
And
have to rely on, well, let me go to the manual and see what it says about things.
Yeah. Well, that's what the point I wanted to make was I did want to wrap up this series and this podcast without putting either one of you on the spot. If you could summarize, maybe hopefully positively, what you think the future of education might be, and I'll start with you, Professor Pucci.
Well, I think the future of education has got to be an understanding that you have to set some new standards in terms of what people need to function critically in the world. And at some point, like they do in Germany, at the end of high school, they basically say, you know what? You go to trade school, you go to the university. And I know that we would never do that sort of thing here. Maybe a guidance counselor might make such a suggestion, but in there it's just like, well, let's just face it, you don't like to read, you don't like to write, and university is just not your thing, but you have these certain skills, you're very good at kinetic things. Why don't you try this?
Hmm.
And I think we've got to be realistic about that. Right now at the college, they're making partnerships uh, for jobs that are basically apprenticing to the job, as opposed to an academic procedure beyond the basics of, the math, and beyond the basics of writing and English. And it's sort of like, well, if that's makes them successful, then that's what they need.
So
uh
do you feel like the college level is adapting to that
yeah,
changing trend?
I think they're adapting. They want to have students, and I think there is a need for that ability to get beyond kind of like some of the kinds of teaching that they encounter in high school, where you take it in, you get tested on it, you drop it out.
Hmm.
There's got to be a sense of, there are certain things that have a continuity, if you will.
Right.
And that continuity is something that you can apply across a broad range of things. Like I always thought that, it was kind of silly, but I said, I think police academy should force the students to take a elemental drawing class because it's about observing and using your hand to replicate what your eye sees. And you don't have to be great, but it definitely will improve your powers of observation.
Mm, good point.
And that's why there are classes that ostensibly will say, well, I'm not going to be a movie reviewer or I'm not going to be an artist, but they can still be useful.
Right. Well, that's good. Same question to you, Mr. McCarthy.
I agree with the professor that we need to be more realistic about not only the capacities but the desires of students, and that we will make them see for themselves as quickly as possible that the path that is best for them is the path that meets their interests as well as their abilities. But I'm holding out hope for that day to come when we do get back to the sense that we are in the business of preparing kids for life, and part of life is being, hopefully, Professor Pucci's example of the cleaning lady in France, who nevertheless has Moliere and Racine at her fingertips, because uh, Moliere and Racine are fundamentally good and good for you, and the fact that the beauty of literature and art is something that is not just for people who teach it, but for lifting up the quality of life and even having a healing and restorative quality. There was once a sense that we were preparing our students for participation in a humane and inventive and inclusive culture, and that part of that conviction lay in mastering some sense of what the value of literature and what the value of history was as an ennobling thing. And I'm not saying this as well as I would like to say it, but the job of an English teacher in a brave new world where we had more realistic conceptions of what where people's destiny was going to take them would be to uphold the beauty and the honor and the value of literature as something that just makes our lives better, because it does. And that's just one aspect of it. You could say the same thing about history. You could say the same thing about science. You could say the same thing about learning a multitude of different languages, and learning a musical instrument, and anything that enriches the soul and makes your hours on this earth not only more bearable but more beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we're supposed to do too.
Yeah.
And we should
Well,
get on with it.
I asked you both for an optimistic summarization, and you both provided it eloquently, and I appreciate that. So hopefully, we got from the Stone Age to now as building blocks, right? And we don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of education every generation. And I do appreciate both of you coming on, not only for this episode, but for one or both of the previous episodes, and you were very generous with your time. And yeah, you left me with a positive feeling about the future of education.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm glad for that. That's
For what
one.
the hell that's worth, I don't know.
Well, I mean,
That's
we
one.
have to be hopeful and understand that at some point everyone's got to realize, well, gee, I just can't throw out stuff that I learned because I took the test and passed it.
Yeah.
I have to think about, how can I use this?
Yeah.
I always think about anything that I read or any piece of information that I pick up, and I say, how can I use this?
Yes.
And maybe that's one of the great things about education is that if you get people in that mode, which that's how they think, well, then they are going to be more curious, and they are going to be thinking. They're not going to necessarily say, Macbeth stinks, but what can I learn from Macbeth? It's just like maybe I have to learn the idea of loyalty, or maybe I have to understand that ambition has its limits and maybe its price.
Yep.
And and maybe I'm going to learn something, from that. Not that I'm going to, kill a king and try to become a king, but I might wind up being in a situation where I have an opportunity to backstab somebody, and I'm not going to do it
Yeah.
because I saw how Macbeth turned
Yep.
out.
Yep.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, if the
On
education
the-
dollar prevents that, then it's money well spent.
On the anniversary of one great Irish writer's birth, I think of another great Irish writer, Oscar Wilde, who said that the basis of optimism is sheer terror. And if nothing else, and this might not be the most cheerful thought to end on, but we have to be hopeful, because what's the alternative? Education was supposed to be the silver bullet. It was supposed to be the great equalizer.
Right.
It was supposed to be what raised the quality of life from generation to generation.
Right.
So let it be. To
Well,
quote an English writer. Yes.
Somebody had a hat once, or a T-shirt, I forget, that may or may not be in this podcast right now. The cost of education is cheaper than the cost of no education. So with that, I'll wrap it up, and I thank you again, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. And it was very interesting, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr.
And
McGee.
hopefully we'll see you both further on up the road.
Absolutely.
Okay, very
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Take care.
Peace.